Hello, my name is Chip Pickering. I'm the CEO of INCOMPAS, and today we have Brian Worthen, the CEO and founder of Mammoth Networks, and we're very pleased that he is with us today to talk through what he is seeing in the COVID crisis, how he's managing during this time, and it is part of an ongoing series that we've had about Ask the Executives, managing through crisis. And so, Brian, welcome. And I'm glad that you've joined us today, and we'd love to hear both your broader story about your company and who you serve and where you are, and then just talk about the immediate pressing issues that you face today in the midst of the crisis.
Thank you, Chip. My company builds broadband in the most rural corners of the Rockies. So we have a presence primarily in Wyoming and Colorado, but we stretch from the inland northwest of Washington through northern Idaho into Montana and down into northern New Mexico. And it provides service to roughly 110, 115 communities. So these communities can be anywhere from 300 to 30,000. We're in a couple of communities that have 50,000, and those are our biggest cities where we have a presence. So we spend a lot of time in rural America and building relationships with cities and counties and local government and small business owners in the most craziest places you've ever seen.
Well, and as I was as I was introducing you, I forgot to mention that you serve on the INCOMPAS Board of Directors. And you've been a welcome addition to our team. And we've really enjoyed over the last several years getting to know you as we fight the battles in Washington on Capitol Hill and at the FCC. Talk a little bit about INCOMPAS and your experience on the board and coming to DC and getting to know the INCOMPAS team.
INCOMPAS has been interesting because I have been attending for years without involvement, and the recent efforts regarding forbearance and similar efforts in Washington have demanded some time be spent in Washington by myself if we want to retain access to those products. And so over the last couple of years, I found myself spending more time with INCOMPAS staff and visiting the Hill, and it's been a learning experience, but I saw a different side of INCOMPAS that I had not seen prior. And that side of INCOMPAS is the activity on the Hill and the meetings and involvement and relationships built at a national level. In fact, what I realized during all this is INCOMPAS was a conduit for us to have access to Washington at a much greater scale than I could have on my own. I work literally across the street from one of my state senators, and obviously I can get a meeting with him, but that doesn't necessarily impact the efforts to retain telecom product and have an impact in Washington at the FCC level.
One thing that I've enjoyed is when you and your other what we call the Incredibles, the CEOs of companies similar to yours, but in other places, whether it's Missouri or Oregon or California or Mississippi, we really have a very, I think, compelling and persuasive group because you are a CEO and you can tell real life stories of what you mean and what you do for your community. And a lot of times that's so much more effective than having a hired lobbyist who's in Washington, who's disconnected from the actual community and constituents a member of Congress has. And so your voice is heard, and it's been very effective. And so I want to thank you for all the time, the resources, the investment you've made in making INCOMPAS better. More importantly, making our advocacy more effective. So
thank you, Chip. I appreciate you saying that.
And then as we look, those were kind of the past battles, but in the midst of this crisis, we have major COVID-related legislation and stimulus and recovery and long-term vision for what our country needs in broadband before we get to those subjects, though, I kind of want to go back and just hear your day-to-day experience. What are the services? What are you seeing for your business, your workers, your employees during this time?
The most interesting aspect of this is we were hit early because we have a presence in Colorado in these ski towns. And so in places such as Eagle County, Colorado, which is Vail, Beaver Creek, that footprint that we have there, it was affected early on because of the international travelers, and the same for Durango, Colorado. And so we found ourselves initially spending a lot of time on policy. Even before the FFCRA came out, we were trying to set policy on when a possibly affected employee had to stay home, how long they would stay at home, and whatnot. And there's so much conflicting information being handed out by governmental authorities. It was a little bit of a Wild West situation, and we just had to arrive at a policy. Unfortunately, we arrived at a policy that gave us a good balance. And even prior to the FFCRA, what we found was it was a nice bonding moment for our employees, because some employees were needing to stay home because of possible exposure, and they ran out of PTO. And so a number of our employees pooled their PTO together and donated that to those that were running out. So it's been a bonding experience for our employees, and we've looked at that as a positive. As time progressed, we saw some more interesting things, and the one that's been the most impactful is our work orders have doubled since this started. And so we're seeing a lot of activity. There's been a push to get students connected, teachers connected. Our legislature is now meeting on Zoom. There's a widespread demand for this. In DSL, for instance, we're seeing most of the migration from DSL to our broadband product, and that's because the upload is most important when you have one or two remote workers at home and possibly one or two students. The upload is more critical. So you think about the 25/3 FCC guidelines for a broadband, and that's the threshold. I think this pandemic will change the emphasis on the upload and really create room for additional speeds in the future.
What are you seeing as far as the adoption of telemedicine or telehealth, and is that something that your company does? You had mentioned connecting schools and students and families so that they can have remote learning. What are you seeing on the healthcare side?
The healthcare industry is really scrambling because in rural markets, what we're seeing is they're limiting elective surgeries and non-essential trips to the hospital, the local clinic. And as a result, some of these medical providers are actually having to decrease staff because they don't have the demand on services, and they can't keep their staff busy enough, and they're seeing a drop in their revenue. And so that's the interesting part about rural compared to a metro market, is these health providers are reeling from the impacts of COVID. Not only do they have to separate a certain client base within their physical location that could be impacted by COVID, but they actually have a decrease in their revenue. And so our focus has been to make sure that we're just operational and up. There's not a lot of time to focus on telemedicine, but we are seeing, and we saw this with one of our employees in Colorado, we are seeing a number of medical visits or appointments happening over something even as simple as a FaceTime. So everybody that has an iPhone has access to FaceTime, and that's been interesting. So what we've seen from a telemedicine standpoint is really simple. We've learned that medical visits can actually happen remote, and then we're seeing the impact on hospitals. But that's another byproduct of this event is we provide redundancy and route diversity to a number of rural hospitals, and it's pretty rewarding to talk about that to our employees and staff, and that's helped us keep those staff engaged. So the pride in keeping these hospitals up and running and going. The hospital in Wyoming that's providing the most care to COVID-related patients, we're their internet provider, and that's a great story to tell to my staff and keep them going and understanding how critical they are.
Talk a little bit as, you know, a founder, CEO, leader. When a crisis comes like this, how do you communicate to your employees and to your customers? And what are some of the lessons or principles that you've learned that are most effective during a time like this?
Well, first of all, I think I've made the assumption that I'm always the blue collar guy in the group. You know, so when you were giving me credit for the work in DC and the advocacy, I thought I represented the blue collar folks. So I'll answer that from a blue collar perspective. It's about stories. It's about telling stories to your employees and saying we're helping this hospital remain in service. There's been a number of construction related fiber cuts in the last 6 weeks, probably half a dozen in the last 6 weeks, affecting multiple communities. And the ability to go to our employees and say, because we bought this route diversity, because we have 2 routes or 2 ways to get in and out of this community, this is helping this community operate. And those kind of stories really have an impact. And it's as simple as we've got employees sewing masks for our installers at home on their off hours. And just talking about that internally to our employees really helps them feel like they're part of something here. Yeah. It's making the employee feel like they're part of something.
You know, this reminds me of a conversation that we've been having. That's kind of a running conversation. Is meaning and purpose for every person is so significant, and feeling like you've climbed maybe one mountain in life. What is the next mountain that you have to climb in the midst of a crisis? I think all of our families and communities and where we work, we're trying to see in the midst of this pandemic, what is our purpose? And so what I hear you saying is that you're communicating meaning and purpose to your employees by what you do for the people you serve. Is this your first or your second mountain, Brian, in starting Mammoth?
I think I'm still on my first, but if you think about the evolution of our company, we've pivoted 7 times. We've gone from a dial-up company to a DSL company to a wireless to a fiber. We're constantly changing, and so we view ourselves as being flexible and moving with a certain degree of speed or alacrity. The second mountain for us is probably this year, because the focus 6 months ago on broadband was very political. It was a part of very political discussion. But the CAF2 auction has really emphasized what impact that can have on rural America. And now, since those 6 months ago, not only are we talking about that at a governmental level, but we're talking about that from an RDOF level. And you think about the capital we're putting in, and we've been doing this out of our pocket and reinvestment. So I say this is our first mountain because we're still working towards this goal, but the second mountain is happening in the next 12 months because we have RDOF, we have expanded CARES Act for programming that provides broadband through the USDA, through the FCC. This is going to be a pivotal year for me and for our organization because we're going to have to step it up. We've grown on our cash and we've been responsible and taken a blue collar approach. And we're going to have to, if we're going to move the needle on broadband and have an impact on our rural markets, we're going to have to go big.
You know, as you talk about, the second mountain, I really think that the crisis is going to create this moment of transformation for the country, that broadband is going to become viewed as essential, indispensable, and a critical service or infrastructure. And the level of public funding that will flow into a new vision, which is to connect every American everywhere to real broadband, not 25/3, but what will allow somebody to work from home, learn from home, have healthcare delivered to their home and over telemedicine and telehealth. And this moment of transformation that will also happen in the Internet of Things and the industrial manufacturing and advanced robotics and all the applications that will flow over networks. And if a community or an individual or a family does not have that connectivity, they'll be left out and left behind. So I think we'll see this massive shift in public policy that will try to connect every American. And that will, for a company like yours and our other member companies, our voices right now are going to be very, very needed and influential of what is the right way to do the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. What is the right way to do a new E-rate or an expanded E-rate? How do we really promote telemedicine, telehealth, and the advanced manufacturing and applications that will flow over your networks? And so we are in a pivotal point in our nation's history. The pandemic has created an opportunity for us to be able to tell the stories in Washington for you with Congress and with the FCC. And I want to do everything we can to use the moment for good. As a lot of families and a lot of people are experiencing a lot of struggle and challenge and some suffering and the sickness and loss right now. So whatever we can do to be the voice of a company like Mammoth and the customers and the people that you employ, that's kind of our mission right now and our purpose. What else, if you had to think through anything else that is needed as we come out and hopefully build to a recovery, any major points that you think we should emphasize?
Well, I think it's when you talk about involvement in the INCOMPAS advocacy and whatnot, I think the last couple of years has been interesting because there's a group of people out there building and doing. And what I'd like to see is an understanding there's a number of people across our country that are just doers. They roll up their sleeves and they get it done. And I think that's been one of the most interesting things that our involvement with INCOMPAS has produced over the last couple of years is as we meet on the Hill and have these meetings at the FCC, there's a newfound understanding that there's a group of folks that are just rolling up their sleeve and doing it. And it can be at a subdivision level or an HOA level to a city to a statewide level. What I'd like to see is a better understanding of that in the future, because those are the people, and I like to think I'm one of them, that are going to change broadband for America. The quarter to quarter investor report, market response, how's the business doing, creates such a short-term view for these public companies that have been tasked for the last couple decades to deliver broadband. And I don't see those companies moving the needle as much as folks like myself. And that's just me taking pride in what I do. But I'd like to see a better understanding just nationwide of the fact that there are people out there like myself, like others that you mentioned, that are just getting to work.
One thing that over the last few years that I have enjoyed is, as Mammoth and other companies have joined INCOMPAS, they are the builders and the doers. And what we're learning is that the legacy networks and legacy companies and the incumbents are really too indebted, too entangled with the past to build the future. And so we're seeing this new wave of entrepreneurs really doing the investment and the building all over the country. And instead of having 2 or 3 companies, which is the myth of many in Washington, doing the big network capital investment. It's actually companies like yours that are going town by town, community by community, rural state and region by rural state and region. And it's going to be hundreds of builders, if not thousands, that will make broadband available everywhere, much more than just a handful of companies that are the large. Now, the large will be an important part of it, but I really think that the new surge of investment and building is coming from companies like Mammoth and others that are part of INCOMPAS. So we're very proud to tell that story on the Hill, and having y'all come, whether it's our policy summit, our days on the Hill, going to the members of the Colorado delegation or the Montana and the Wyoming, where you are, and as other companies go to their members, that story is beginning to be understood, and it just takes repetition to break through and have that understood so that the policies will reflect that, to enable y'all to do your job. Some of the things that are in the COVID legislation would be something we call the deployment agenda. How do you streamline permitting? How do you have access to poles? How do you make sure that the fees are reasonable so that you can deploy as quickly as possible without delay? Talk a little bit about the deployment agenda. I know it's not easy building in the country, and going town by town, you face hurdle after hurdle. Talk a little bit about that.
I think one of the things I've learned in the last year is, and I thought I knew rural pretty well, but as we've gone into smaller communities, and this is the difference between myself and in these what you call the large companies. We're going into smaller and smaller communities, and some of these smaller towns don't have a full-time attorney, a city attorney, and so it's an outside party, and you're educating. I'm finding myself educating them on franchise agreements, right-of-way, easement, pole attachment, and we're having to do that town by town, municipality by municipality, and it's a lot of heavy lifting. The other interesting aspect of this is, as we're going into smaller and smaller communities, we actually built out into a town called Ophir, Colorado, which is over by Telluride, and the interesting thing there is there's no elected government. It's a town meeting. And so how do you cut an agreement with the different personalities in the room when it's just simply a town meeting? But our guys were able to do that, and we deliver broadband to the area with a combination of fiber and wireless. And there's literally fiber to the home in Ophir, Colorado, which doesn't even have a gas station. So the challenge we are facing is educating the community and not being viewed as coming in as an outsider, because they're traditional people that come in to their meetings and want an agreement with the city, are the phone company or the cable company, and the people have developed a distrust over the years. And so as a result, that distrust falls on me, and I spend a lot of my time dispelling that. And that's our biggest challenge right now, actually.
Trust, whether it's on the Hill or in the town, in the community, is important. So, and I think that's one of the things that as we go to the Hill, the authenticity of our member companies telling real stories, and as they build and do and how they serve, it is amazing. David can beat Goliath, not only in the marketplace, but on the Hill. But it does take showing up, telling the story. Anything that you'd like to say to those who are not members of INCOMPAS that would hopefully encourage them to join our community and our cause going forward?
I think it's what I said earlier, as far as you have a voice. And so no matter your size, if you have a good story, as we've talked about, and you can relate this to not only your counterparts in the industry, but on the Hill, or to your legislator in a meeting that is established for for some purpose, whether Encompass is coordinating that or you're coordinating that, the backing of Encompass and the messaging that Encompass provides helps you take that story to your legislator or to the Hill and produce a result. And I've seen that firsthand. And so the access to this is access I never realized was out there. I actually had no idea that I'm from Wyoming, and we feel like nobody can access anything, and we're just on our own. And social distancing, we've been doing that for 130 years, right? Like we're just so independent, and I think that's ingrained in a lot of people. And the smaller the business and the smaller the operation, you have a tendency to be a little take on a little defeatist mentality, and the voice that we've gained through Encompass has been huge. It's really been eye-opening, and it's not been an issue for me. In fact, I went to DC in early March, and that was a whim. I was driving from Cheyenne North, and there were meetings set up, and I turned the car to Denver and flew on an overnight plane and went to meetings. And I'm willing to put in the time for that because it has an impact, and that's what I would tell other people.
Well, one thing that I'd like to also express, watching the friendships of other CEOs, other builders, other companies, having that sense of community of how do we learn from each other? How do we, if I've built a fiber or a fixed wireless system in this town, this is what worked. The sharing of the expertise, as well as sharing the story and the advocacy. And then just the deep friendships that I witnessed is something that I'm grateful to see, and the loyalty to helping others, not only in your community, but in the industry, build their own companies and build their own story. So, Brian, I'm thankful that we're climbing the mountain together. And I look forward to finding ways to help Mammoth and our other member companies as we really go through, not from a crisis to what I believe will be a tremendous opportunity to connect every American over the next few years. So thank you, and thank you for joining us today in this series, and we look forward to continuing our work together.
Thank you, Chip, and thank you. Tell your staff thank you.
I will. All right, Brian. Take care.
Bye-bye.